morning, everyone. I welcome you all to today's webinar hosted by Additional Skill Acquisition Program in association with Higher Education Department of Kerala. And the topic is Year 1 Post-COVID, the New Normal. Before I introduce the speaker, we have a quick logistical announcement. All the attendees, please note, to ensure the conduction of the session within the timeline, your audio will be remain muted for the entire session. You are requested to post your questions or your opinions in the Q&A box, which will be addressed by the speaker during the Q&A session. Today we have with us an amazing leader, an industry veteran with 22 years of experience and has more than 14 years of experience with the networking giant Cisco. As we are in the midst of a major digital transformation, which is shaping a new normal, let me introduce our speaker, Daisy Chittilapalli, the Managing Director of Digital Transformation Office for Cisco, India and SAARC countries, to talk about how life will be after COVID-19 and what it means for you. On behalf of ASAP team, I welcome you, ma'am, to today's session. Once again, I welcome you all to the session. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Deepthi, for the opportunity to talk to all of you today. Many of the things that I will talk about during the course. So what I thought I'll do today is I'll talk, because this is obviously many of you are joining remotely from many corners of Kerala, is my understanding. So I thought the best way to perhaps get the most value for you out of this meeting is I'll talk for maybe the first 30 minutes and then give you a chance to comment on what I'm saying, ask questions, because I hope to learn as much from all of you as I hope you can take away from this conversation with me. So, that I hope will be a good outcome for all of us who are spending an hour on this meeting today. So thank you again for the opportunity. At the beginning, I have to say that this is a period of unprecedented, it is an unprecedented time in our history, right? Many of us, certainly I think most of you on this call are maybe younger than me. Therefore, I can safely say that maybe all of us or most of us on this call have not seen a situation like this where the world has come to a virtual halt. And so therefore, it is certainly a period of uncertainty, especially for many of you as you are finishing your formal education period and trying to build a career and a life or maybe a business for yourselves. But I want to say that I am actually quite optimistic. And that the reason I'm optimistic is because mankind has always come out positive from a crisis. When you go back in history and look at any crisis that we have faced, we've always come out on top. We have found a way to adapt and make life better for us. And that's why in this century, the overall metrics, any metric that you measure mankind on is much better than what it would have been in previous centuries. And India in particular, that's great for mankind, but what is the India situation, right? Does India have anything to cheer about? And I think many of the things that were good about India and were promising for India prior to COVID-19 still continue to be promising and positive for India post COVID-19 or as we battle through COVID-19. And the first part of that is that we had recognized as a country the need to get more and more digital and to use digital as a way to become a $5 trillion economy in the next 2025, by 2025. So we had already put forward a path to use technology as one of the levers to pivot towards a high growth economy and fulfilling the potential of what India can be. And I know many of you on this call are also technology students. So anytime there is a concerted effort like Digital India around technology, that is always good for technologists and students and academia and influencers in that space. The second thing which is very positive for India, which is there before and post-COVID, is the fact that India is a nation of young go-getters. Most of India is under 35. There are people like you who are able, who have energy, who have great learning skills, and you on your shoulders, unfortunately or unfortunately, rests the promise of a brighter India. And perhaps the third thing is that, and this could be plus or minus, and we'll come to that in a bit, but we have as a country been very, very comfortable dealing with chaos, right? And we thrive as a country, we pride ourselves sometimes on thriving in chaos. And this environment presents chaos and confusion, but our innate ability to deal with this also puts Indians in a better position than many other countries who are taken aback a little bit when their standard set processes of living are disturbed. So I do want to say that while a lot of things I will say during the next 30 minutes looks very uncertain and confusing, you must, I hope you will walk away with optimism and the fact that in every disruption lies opportunity. And that is a mantra I'll live my life by. And I hope that is what you will take away at the end of this 1 hour. So, the word BC has now got a new meaning, right? It used to be before Christ, but now it is increasingly being referred to as before COVID-19. And these are all the scenes which are very, very familiar with us. And we have all been part of these big crowds in many of these places. But the question that a lot of people are asking, and we are asking, is will stadiums be as full for an IPL match? Will people travel from all over the country, sometimes for up to 2 days, to attend a 2-hour meeting? Do Indian weddings really need 1,000 and 2,000 people and spend so much money that could have been put to some other use? Will public transportation stay the same? Right? And these are the questions. Will we all go back to the way that things were when we come out of COVID? Will things stay the same as it was before COVID-19 happened? And it's also a time when we're learning new behaviors. And the reason we're asking this question is because new behaviors are emerging, right? We're washing our hands more often. We've replaced handshakes with namastes and foot shakes. We are a little bit more wary. When Ola and Uber used to be all the rage, now we are concerned about sharing the taxi with somebody else. We are even more concerned about using taxis in itself in the first place, etc., etc. So our behaviors pre-COVID and post-COVID have changed significantly. And if you go by what behavioral scientists say, it takes only 2 months for a consistent behavior to become a habit. To be precise, 66 days if you do the same thing, then it's very likely that that thing you did, if it's washing your hands 4 times a day, is going to stay as a habit for the rest of your life. So if we, I would say that we as a consumer, right? We as an individual, we as a consumer, if we change our behaviors, then will the businesses that cater to us or the governments that interact with us stay the same, or will they also change, right? So that's the interesting question, especially because I'm coming from the background of business today and talking to you from the perspective of a job and a career, etc. As you enter that space, will these new habits or new behaviors, that's perhaps the most interesting question. Will new behaviors, which become lifelong habits, will that influence the way that businesses and governments are run? That's really the most important question at this point in time for everybody in the world today. And clearly, there are a few trends which are emerging, which are indicative of this impending change. So I've tried to talk through a few of them today, and they are not obviously a comprehensive list. And this is still a point of view that we are developing in Cisco. But there are clearly some trends which are now obvious, right? Which are now obvious. Some changes which are now obvious will happen. And so what are those changes that we should expect, or those trends that we should expect? And how do we prepare ourselves? What do we watch out for when these trends happen around us, happen to us, and how can we adapt, right? Because Darwin said it's survival of the fittest. We have since rewritten that by saying it's actually the survival of the most adaptable. So what could be some of these trends, and how should we, what should we expect? How should we expect to change ourselves to deal with these changing trends? So the first one is very obvious. This is what we are calling the rise of the stay-at-home economy. So the stay-at-home economy is basically makes the assumption of the fact that we have done for the last 8 weeks in Bangalore, for some of you in Kerala maybe lesser, But 8 weeks and counting in Bangalore, everybody and everything is happening from home. Whether you are whether you're running your business, whether you work for Cisco, whether you're a student, all of your primary activities and many of your hours in a day, active hours in a day, are being spent at home. So all of the activities which formed the crux of your life is happening from home. The second thing clearly is that by intention, we are avoiding crowded places, and therefore from environments of huddling together and doing group study and things like that, we are now talking, we're sitting alone at home and studying, maybe talking to people over remote mediums, but essentially we have become more isolated and secluded. Naturally, a classroom, in your case, a classroom which would have 20, 30, 40, 50 students is now distributed over 40, 50 homes. Right? And while everybody has an independent entity and identity, the digital dependence is very, very high. So what is, this is something that you've already lived through, so I don't need to ponder a lot more on this point. But really what has made this possible is the rise in apps. So we were always an app economy. Even before COVID, I think we were very clearly we had become, when I say we, I mean the world in general had become an app economy. And COVID has only accelerated our consumption of apps even more. Right? The other thing it has done is also driven a host of low touch or no touch services. And what do I mean by that? If I used to use cash earlier for maybe 50% of my expenses, over the last 60 days, I've gone completely credit card, completely Google or Amazon Pay or Paytm and things like that. And even health consultation, right? Most states have issued a directive that unless absolutely necessary, don't come into hospital. But there are people who are managing their illnesses by talking to their doctors over either the hospital's platform or through third-party platforms like Practo and so on and so forth. And then, Swiggy still continues to deliver, except that they don't anymore ring your doorbell and give it to you in your hand. They pretty much leave it at your door and leave. So there's no contact between you and the person who's delivering food. And some businesses, right, have completely gone back to their mode of selling virtually online. So the brick and mortar stores have completely reinvented overnight to figure out how they have an online presence and start delivering their products and services through online models. So that is another way that businesses have reopened or stayed open throughout the last couple of months and longer globally as well. The biggest shift in terms of people that this indicates is the rise of the gig economy. And you know what the gig economy is. The gig economy is basically referring to people who have a very specialized skill, but who are not employees of the company that they depend on their livelihood for. So an excellent example of this is all the e-commerce companies that you're seeing in India, the drivers of Uber, the food delivery boys of Swiggy and Zomato, and so on and so forth, the Amazon delivery guys, etc., are the most visible people that we have seen in the country. The unseen part of this economy is the fact that India is one of the largest software development gig economies in the world. And so these are people who work for themselves, who attach themselves to projects for a short period of time, and then go on to do other things. So the size of this economy in India overall is about 17 odd million at this point, expected also to grow at about 17+%. And that is the highest employment growth rate that one can hope for. Even in regular times, it is higher than the employment growth rate in the country. So clearly this is coming into its own, right? This business of working for yourself and not having a formal employment with an employer is increasingly becoming the norm. I'm not sure if any of you know, but Wipro, who you know as a very large formal employer in the country, actually has a gig economy company as well as part of its portfolio. And over 1 lakh people work in that gig economy part of Wipro. They don't work for Wipro. They actually work for other companies and other projects. But that is how, and it is not that, this is anything that anybody in Wipro has shared with me, but it is no stretch of imagination to think that at some point they will think about converting a part of their population to include gig workers, right? And this is not just Wipro, but many of us are thinking and toying with the idea of using specialized skills for short period projects, right? Primarily, if it is to do with innovation and so on and so forth. So the second trend that is clearly happened in the COVID world, and which perhaps will not go back to normal, is this whole question around trust, right? Um, Even our best friends, we don't want to invite them over to our homes now. So trust in people, trust in places, and trust in things. So this newfound commitment to hygiene and health, we think is a change that has happened, is a permanent change that has happened, and it will continue to exist post COVID-19. The second conversation, and we see this not just in a health crisis, we see this in an economic crisis as well. And Cisco personally saw this during the 2008-9 downturn, is what I like to call a flight to quality, which means that if things were normal, you would be willing to experiment with brands or with companies. But when things get when the situation is more representative of a crisis, there is a premium attached to quality. So the trust in the brand will pretty much overcome the concern about the premium on pricing, as an example, right? So there will be there will be more focus on buying from companies which are trustworthy, so to say. Clearly, social businesses and events will be impacted, because if you could do a business meeting, maybe online, offline mode, completely online today, do you really need to go back to the mode of inviting thousands of people into one single place and doing that event, which is logistically so much more difficult to do, right? Getting all of you, for example, me coming to Kerala to talk to you, getting all of you physically into a single space requires far more planning than setting up this meeting is taking. Right? And of course, we have already started to see this. There will be greater protectionism. You can call it self-reliance, etc., etc. But there will be restrictions on travel. Let's say you go to another country, how many the debate is still on. How many days should you be quarantined if you are walking in or coming in from another country, right? So what new rules around this will emerge as well. So to cater to all these heightened concerns, there will be behaviors on the business side also that will change. I already talked about how events are being reimagined. To give you a Cisco example, we did one of our marquee events called Live in Melbourne, completely online this year, because COVID had struck, and typically about 7 to 9,000 people come to this event physically, but we had to take that event completely online. And what happened when we took it online is that actually more people participated. Close to 50,000 people participated when we took this conversation online. So all businesses have woken up to this reality that perhaps taking meetings virtual actually allows you to get more people and more participants in that conversation. You may still have travel, but it will not be low cost. You know, for a while, the tourism industry has moved to getting more and more people to travel. Perhaps with all these lockdown restrictions and quarantine restrictions and so on and so forth that countries may impose, we may potentially see a swing to the opposite side in terms of luxury travel. So only those who can afford to go into quarantine for 2 weeks and then have a holiday may be able to go on some of these jaunts. Like I said, the jury is still open on that. Features into products that we use, because we will become more concerned about health and hygiene. There will be products that we've always bought, but suddenly that germ filter on the air conditioner will look more attractive and more necessary to have than good to have than it was before. But I think the biggest behavior we're seeing is about stockpiling. So over a period of time, and this is particularly true for manufacturing, but anybody, the supply chain industry in general, and supply chain tends to be at the heart of every business. We have always, gotten things from other places and just-in-time manufacturing, right? We've all heard about the Toyota use case where parts come from a number of suppliers all over the world, and cars are manufactured from a factory anywhere in the world. The problem that happened when COVID happened is that most auto, because China shut down first and most of the parts were coming out of China, all automakers, irrespective of their country of origin, whether it was Germany, whether it was India, whether it was the US, ground to a halt in less than 3 weeks because they had run out of parts. So suddenly, from having just in time inventory, having the inventory which backs up your production is coming back into fashion. Now, somewhere in between will be the balance as companies decide on their business plans. So clearly, supply chain, as we have known it for the last 15 to 20 years, will not be the same it was prior to COVID-19, is pretty much a certainty. This is sort of the same as the previous point, right? Saying that quality, I did say there will be a flight. We must expect a flight to quality. So quality and transparency will drive sales, not instinct. Or another way of saying this is information will be key to making a sale. And the reason I say sales is not because I'm a salesperson, but for all businesses to thrive, basically the sales engine has to run smoothly, right? So the transparency, the truth in your conversations, the decision making that you do, because you are no longer, maybe not all of you will walk into a store to buy something. So there is no possibility for a store manager to assess me as I walk into the store to tell whether I will buy this versus that. Right? I will be an invisible entity. They will look at my purchase pattern and decide that this is potentially what will appeal to me. There is no way the touch conversation can drive a sale. So more and more information will become critical to understanding who the consumer is and to cater better and better to an increasingly invisible consumer. I know online retail has already made a small start, but it is still a fraction of overall retail. So this whole brick and mortar business that we are talking about will certainly looks like it is taking a hit. And we have seen that, right? Where Amazon sales were going through the roof, we have Neiman Marcus filing for bankruptcy in the US. And Neiman Marcus is really a premium brand for those, for people in the Western part of the world. So clearly, information, quality, things that were there before, but things which will become important like organic, sustainability, good for the planet, all of those types of things that will become important. And customer experience, we call it customer experience now, but you will also know it by the word customer service. Customer service will become very big criteria of how we decide to buy. So trusted brands, the transparency information they provide us, and how well they treat us, how well they know us, is what will make decisions happen for consumers. And therefore, businesses will reorient to make all of this possible. So you will see spends happening into spaces. R&D will not, there will be more money into R&D because you will have to reorient products to become more appealing to an increasingly invisible customer. And the second thing is you will have to reimagine how your customer service or customer experience is going to look like, right? How will you interact with your consumer if they are not going to come into the bank, but they are going to just be on your online mobile banking application, as an example. And because of all these changes, clearly business models will evolve. And this is not something you don't know already. This is what led to new age companies like Ola and Uber and Swiggy and Zomato and all of them, right? All of them are tech disintermediators. So they took an existing process and they disintermediated it to make through a new business model. That's what they did, and that's what's led to their success. So therefore, you will see more of it as there are new habits, new behaviors, new compulsions on businesses and governments. There will be new business models that will naturally emerge. Clearly, we don't know what and all will emerge, but there will be business models that emerge to cater to new demand that exists, that will certainly come into being after this slowdown of 3 to 6 months is over. You can also see existing businesses taking very dramatic positions to change, right? So before COVID-19 happened, if you were a super specialized company doing one thing and doing one thing only, it was really adding to your valuation as a company. Think about Ola, think about Airbnb, think about all of these companies. But now So Airbnb is positioned from saying that, you have a room in your house, you can rent it out every day as long as you're willing to be a super host on Airbnb. They've gone and changed that model overnight to saying, sorry, if you have a room in your house, you can only rent it out from, between renting it to one person and the other next person, you have to have a window of at least 24 to 72 hours before you can rent it to the next person. So companies are rethinking the very basis of the business model that has given rise to them. They are also going, it's also a time when people have figured out that diversification is a better idea than doing only one thing. So that's why Uber is now, delivering food, has been for a while. Swiggy is delivering groceries, which they never previously thought was good enough to do. So, with your same capabilities, can you do more and more things? Is another way of business model evolution. And the concept of sharing, for example, right? Ola and Uber, which looked so fantastic only 60 days ago, suddenly is not looking so fantastic, to the point that RC Bhargava of Maruti says that he expects the automobile industry to get a surge from buyers who may go back to owning cars. And your generation is very much the generation he was concerned about. And, I'm also part of that generation. I've not used my own car. I don't have my own car for the last 4 to 5 years. But now I'm increasingly thinking about the necessity to at least have maybe a small car so I don't have dependence on public transport should such a crisis happen again. And even during, now as this crisis goes on and there is no access to public transportation, right? So these are some of the conversations that are very much valid. Malls have been, while shops have opened, malls continue to be closed. So we had seen a big movement to large format malls, but if you look at anywhere in the country, what is still closed is the shops which are inside malls. So malls continue to be closed. So will that lead to more flattening of the retail ecosystem? Is another thing that we have to talk about. And as more and more things become digital, the interesting thing is we never used to value the in-person touch. We had as a race started attributing value, more and more value, to online and digital. But maybe when that becomes the ubiquitous norm, you will actually add value and premium to a touch experience, which means that it may actually be more expensive for you to buy a piece of jewelry if you walk into the store and buy it versus if you buy it online. So you will learn to value and pay for personal touch more than digital is also potentially something that we can expect, right? Because retail may not have trying rooms, as many trying rooms as before. Trying rooms may be a premium asset that they may decide to charge you for, etc., etc. So certainly business model disruptions will happen, but we'll have to see what the nature of those business model disruptions will be. And this one I perhaps don't have to explain too much, because the reason why India, even during the 60 days of lockdown, has stayed at about, I think the number was about 48% of GDP productivity, is because there are technology is at play, right? So technology was always set to disrupt, be a big part of our lives. Digital disruption will become more a norm than, really an outlier effect. It will accelerate further, right? But there are some specific things which were early stage, which perhaps this will accelerate further. And this is all the new technologies that you've been hearing about. As consumption becomes, or as the home economy becomes more and more prevalent, you will need greater bandwidth, you will need greater connectivity at home, etc. So 5G, which is going to take another couple of years to come into India, a couple of years to get up to speed at a scale level, democratized level worldwide, may become the norm because it promises more bandwidth at home. And so we can run more applications out of home than we can today. Some of the other technologies, right? Artificial robots, drones, 3D printing, all of these are also set to accelerate in a very big way because you don't want to depend on parts which are coming from some other country. You may just decide to print them for yourselves. In India, for example, dentists are already printing a lot of the parts that they use, but maybe it will become more widely accepted for other industries as well. because of contactless deliveries, which are on the rise, robots, drones, and types of those, technology that helps making all of that possible is certainly set to take a rise. Virtual, anything which is tuned towards virtual experiences, WebEx, on which this meeting is running, is a great example, but people are already running complicated conference style formats, concerts, etc. So people are trying to make the virtual experience as real life as possible. So there are more and more capabilities coming into the virtual experience world. AR, VR is also a part of it. Um, and at the manufacturing for the Internet of Things, which is also starting to take off, more and more automation of factory lines, the capability to manage and monitor some of these facilities remotely. One of the things that happened when COVID-19 struck is all the factories shut because there was no other way to do it. Do we want to be in that position when the next crisis comes along? And it doesn't have to really be a worldwide crisis, right? It can just be a crisis that is local to where the factory is. But so you need the capability to be able uh, to run this remotely, etc. So there will be a lot of automation, line automation of plants, plus the ability for things to connect back, and for us as humans to manage and monitor them remotely. That is another technical capability that will happen as well. So, and you've heard of this term cloud, but um, if you can't go to a place and fix something, then you have to be able to fix it from a remote thing. So a lot of your capabilities will also have to be extracted, technical capabilities, technology capabilities at the government level, business level, etc., has to be abstracted into a centralized model where so there's some capabilities at the edge, but there'll be some capabilities in the cloud. That's the only way to scale and scale at speed in a crisis like this. So clearly digital was already front and center, but the scale of adoption across businesses, across size of businesses and across governments will get accelerated further. So in summary, you will have an impact on your social lives. Weddings will never stay the same. So what happens to the destination wedding industry? Restaurants will never stay the same because you'll have a limitation on the number of people. You'll be able to, in the same real estate footprint, you're likely looking at half or less than half the people that you could accommodate previously. So what happens to full service industries? What happens to the food industry? What happens to everybody that depends on the food industry, right? Because it is sort of a circular economy, right? The dependence of restaurants on farmers and produce and so on and so forth. Enterprise, right? If TCS says that 75% of my workforce will work from home in the next 75, in the next 20, in the next 5 years, what does it mean for all of you who must have been packing your bags to come to Bangalore? Do you have to do that, or any other place where TCS has a large campus? Do you really have to do that anymore? If you don't have to do that, if you can stay exactly where your home is and you have a good job wherever you are, then what does it mean for the economy in that town, city, village where you live in? Right? So the economic growth, will this mean that economic growth will get flattened? It will not just be a metro story anymore. It can be more democratically pushed to tier 2, tier 3 cities and maybe further downstream. And of course, processes, right? 60 days, most people haven't printed a single thing, but we've all found ways to exchange documents and information. So will printers go out of business, as an example? It had already gone into an as a service model. Nobody was buying printers anymore. Most businesses were just paying for pages, print rupee per page. But now businesses will reconsider and say, if in 60 days I didn't need this even once, really do we need it at all to the scale that we have this capability today? So impact is everywhere. Impact is also circular, right? What I mean by circular is a TCS employee deciding to work from their hometown has an impact on the people and the economy around them, has an impact on everybody and everything that they touch. So in many ways, the impact in one place is also an impact in any other part of the process or the life cycle of that person or that business or that government. So 3 things to prepare for when at this point in time, not just if you're a student, just anybody living in a COVID, post-COVID world, right? The first is money, if you look at any financial advice from any kind of financial advice, money is going to be tight. Cash flows of companies have been hit, so money is tight. The government is overspending and has to also. I mean, we've seen the announcements from all over the world of unforecasted spending that is likely to happen to prop up the economy and to do all of the welfare measures that we definitely need to do. So money is going to be tight everywhere. And the easiest source of funding, which was the venture capital and equity funding in the country, that is also likely to come with a great degree of rules and regulations. So for smaller businesses and startups and et cetera, the impact is across the board, but companies who have their own cash piles will have a better chance of managing within themselves. But companies which are dependent on external funding will certainly take a hit. Even at the individual level, we are all, getting advice to conserve cash, right? So this is not a time to spend lavishly, is the advice all over the place. And that has its implications on businesses, has its implications on governments as well. The hurt and the growth, you will see opportunities, but you will also see disruptions. And they're not in the same place. So some sectors will be really, really badly hit. Airlines, tourism, transportation, hotels, hospitality, those types their recovery will be longer. But there will also be places which will be looking, like I said, all the new business models which will be evolving in tech and other places. So you will see this uneven distribution of loss in one place and growth in another place, right? So that is something that you should be conscious around when you are also looking at industries and making assessments of where to begin your careers, etc. The third thing, because the gig economy is not localized, what I mean by that is there is no necessity. I mean, an employee is an employee, whether they're in the United States of America, whether they're in Europe, or whether they're in Asia or India, right? So in one way, your opportunity landscape is expanding to include the whole world, but therefore your competition landscape, not just yours, ours also, right? So you're competing for a job across the world, you're competing for opportunity across the world, you're also competing for against the best in the world, right? So it's become even more, the Thomas Friedman conversation around the world is flat is particularly true for the gig economy. So not just for students, I think even for all of us, there are 4 or 5 behaviors to instill in ourselves to prepare ourselves for these changes. The first is skills, and skills. So I'm glad that you have this program as an access point, right? So learning is no longer, only limited to your formal education part of your lives. Learning is a lifelong habit. So if you have an opportunity to acquire a new skill, do it. Sometimes the path is not very obvious. And the most famous story is the Steve Jobs story, right? When he was asked, how come, and this is in the early days before Windows, of course, caught up with it, but in the early days of Apple, he was asked how Apple had such beautiful fonts when the rest of the computers had such terrible fonts. And he credited it back to a calligraphy class that he had done for fun when he was in college. In fact, for many of you, the opportunity to learn, and for many of us, the opportunity to learn has been the best ever, right? If you look at the number of free classes that the best universities in the world have put out, whether it's data science courses from the likes of, Yale and Columbia and Harvard and everything else. These are courses which were considered premium. You could only take them if you went to these universities, but they are all in the open domain today. So the opportunity to learn, the best in the world gives free TED Talks, and they are also freely accessible. So I'm saying that, when you spend maybe 15, 20 minutes on WhatsApp and TikTok videos, maybe spend also half an hour on doing some of this. It's something that all of us have to do, right? This is not unique to students. This is for everybody, because learning doesn't stop when you get your first job. To be relevant, because you are going to be in that gig economy, even if you're formally employed, it is a gig economy kind of game. You have to be prepared to be the best, to be relevant, to be the best. Don't be afraid to get out of your comfort zone, because there will be new companies in this. When there is so much chaos, the best opportunities may not come from the most established places. And I have to, I'm going back a few years, but I passed out of Trivandrum Engineering College in '95. and I joined Wipro from campus. My grandfather, my mother's father, he was very disappointed. He said, "You could have very easily got a job as an assistant executive engineer in KSEB. Instead, I don't know, I've never heard of this company called Wipro." But I somehow, in my limited wisdom at that time, thought IT was going to be the future, and I decided to jump. I decided to take a leap of faith and I jumped. So you will get opportunities which don't look very sensible to others. But if it's something that is very, very interesting to you, be willing to take that risk, because in chaos emerges the best opportunities, and they may not be the opportunities of the past. I already talked about the workplace being global. So I know there is this instinct to be very uncomfortable around speaking a language that is not Malayalam, etc., as an example. But we need communication is at the core of establishing your value anywhere in the world, right? Whether you decide to work inside a company, whether you decide to work as part of the gig economy, communication is a core skill. So presence and communication are two soft skills uh, that you must definitely find a way of developing. And like I said, it is not an attendance-based world anymore. It, in companies like Cisco, it never was. There was never a punch-in time and a punch-out time. And I think with more and more people like TCS saying, 75% of the people will work from home, world is moving from an attendant-based way of uh, looking at people's productivity and contribution to an output based way of productivity and contribution. What that means is you have to be self motivated. You cannot be supervised behavior, right? You don't do your best work only if you're supervised. So you have to find a way to be self motivated, self disciplined, and contribute versus manager breathing down the neck or teacher breathing down the neck and therefore ensures best value. And I said the last thing first. Every chaos, every crisis presents opportunities. So please look for opportunities in diversity instead of tackling it with a very fearful approach. Your mindset has to be one of looking for opportunity in disruption rather than being taken under or being overwhelmed by adversity. So be bold, be willing to take risks, be pragmatic, know how the world works, be aware of what the compulsions of the real world are, and know what will work and what will not work. Be very comfortable at virtual interactions. Be empathetic to yourself, understand what you're going through, what other people are going through. And I think another lady who definitely, deserves mention in this list is probably Shailaja teacher, right? She's a great example for all of you in Kerala, a great example of all of these values as, we battle COVID-19. So with that, I'll stop and Deepthi, over to you for Q&A. I know I've run way over the half an hour I promised, but
Thank you, ma'am. That was indeed a great session. We will go ahead and take few questions. Just a reminder to all the attendees, please be sure to type your questions in the question box down below. And we do have a question. Could you explain digital transformation in layman term and how we students can get ready to adapt to these transitions?
Okay. So digital transformation in layman terms, that's okay. Yeah. So when technology, so the simplest way I can put it is when technology is used to change the way people work, live, play, and learn, that is what we refer to broadly as digital transformation. Right. So as an example, I used to go to a restaurant and order food. Then I used to call them up. So that's the first degree of technology thing that I could do is pick up the telephone and then call. So that's the first technology disruption that has happened, that I could pick up a phone, which is also technology, and call them. And then from there, we have moved to Swiggy, which is an online app. So therefore, I no longer need the phone. I moved to another more contactless, more virtual, more accessible methodology of getting the same food delivered to my house, but the efficiency with which I do it and the scale and access of choices I have, etc., has gone up. Right. So technology being used to solve problems at scale, technology being used to monetize opportunities at scale is what digital disruption is. And it is not one technology, right? Digital is not one technology. It is a combination of technologies that come together to make this happen, to make what solving problems or monetizing opportunities. Does that answer the question?
Yes, ma'am. And what are your thoughts on commuting? Will job market will be a bleak for students who just pass out since many companies will look at work from home options till COVID situation stabilizes?
So work from home has no connection to job loss. Okay, so I just want to clarify. I joined Cisco 16 years ago in 2004, and Cisco was already worldwide a work from home enabled environment at that time. Of course, in India, the internet bandwidth situation was not as fantastic. In metros, it was, but other parts of the country, it wasn't. So work from home is not equatable to job losses. In fact, the benefit of having work from home, there are two distinct benefits of work from home, and maybe this will appeal to you or maybe it won't appeal to you. One is that, um, like I said, I already mentioned about the economic empowerment, right? Today, it was true for me, and going by the number of people who still move out of Kerala to work in IT,
Okay.
still, right? Despite I know many of the big names, Indian names have got campuses in Kerala now. But if you look at
Okay.
Bangalore, the number of Malayalis in Bangalore, right? They are still moving state and moving. So if you can work from home, which means you can work from anywhere, right? I'm not saying work from home as home. It can be work from anywhere. Then the economic empowerment, this economic growth concentration in the big metros will get pushed to smaller and smaller towns and cities. So that is definitely a positive. The reason why job losses or the number of recruitments will not be the same is because of the cash flow problem I talked about, right? So companies depend, it all starts with consumption. I'm a consumer. I have 100 rupees to spend. Post COVID, because I'm worried about conserving cash, I will only spend 50. When I spend only 50 rupees, and this is putting it very simplistically, so I go to a bank, I don't take as much loan from the bank as I used to pre-COVID. So the bank takes a hit. The bank outsources its application business to a TCS or a Wipro or somebody else. So therefore Wipro takes a hit. And when Wipro takes a hit, if you're a technology student looking for a job with a Wipro or an Infosys or a TCS, you take a hit. Right? So this is a temporary phenomenon. It has no, again to clarify, it is not connected with work from home. It is connected to this phenomenon of demand, right? So the demand is shrinking. If demand is shrinking, the supply naturally will shrink to meet that demand, right? It is, if you know basic economics, it's correlated, directly correlated or directly proportional to each other. The benefit of having work from home, like I said, it is pushes economic empowerment to further and further corners. And I don't know how many people on this call are women, but women in general, this data is out there. Women like to work. Most Indian women, as an example, like to work within 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers of where they live. And India has one of the poorest women participations in the labor force, even poorer than many African nations, right? 20 to 23% of labor participation of women in the country. Unless we can bring it up to an equitable 40 to 50%, India's dream of becoming a $5 trillion economy will stay a dream. Because you can do everything else, but if you don't get equal labor participation of an able 50% of our population, working population, the dream will never get fulfilled. So if there is concern for women, and this is genuine because I deal with it all day in, day out at Cisco as well, work from home is a great solution for people like that. So work from home is not the reason jobs are not getting created. I just want to make that obvious. And second, the piece is work from home enables gig. So you may not have to ever want formal employment with a great brand, right? If you can find, ultimately, if it is about livelihood and doing the quality of work that you want to do on your own terms, and you're comfortable with that model, work from home allows you to work like that by being a part of the gig economy. So work from home is not the reason for no jobs. The reason for no jobs is the shrinking.
Okay, ma'am. And learning futuristic courses like artificial intelligence, machine learning, how it really impact the hiring? How do you view that in a sector perspective?
Absolutely. So we have shortage in these skills, right? This is why I said it's very important to, and there has never been a better time to learn high-end skills. The country has a shortage, has a clear, not only the country, the world has a big shortage in all the new upcoming technologies. AI, ML, I won't say blockchain because there is only one commercial use case for blockchain that has been established so far, but cryptocurrency, if it becomes a reality, very well could be IoT, that is Internet of Things, and cybersecurity. Okay, so of everything I mentioned, blockchain perhaps in terms of maturity is still a little bit evolving, but artificial intelligence, machine language, AI, ML, uh, IoT, and cybersecurity are all mainstream skills, as in all enterprises, all companies, and even governments need them today. And there is a big, big shortage of skills in this space. So if you have skills in this space, in cybersecurity, in IoT, AI, ML, uh, data sciences and analytics, that's another space. It will certainly boost your chances of landing a role, landing a job, or being employable, being more employable, whether it's a job or whether it's your own skill set put to good use. No doubt about it.
To add to that, ASAP has a division called Advanced Skill Development Centers. Through them, we are actually offering this futuristic courses to our engineering students also.
Yeah, yeah.
And
And
moving
yeah,
to the,
Cisco as well, we are perhaps the largest, we are actually the largest cybersecurity technology provider in the world. So
okay,
one of the things that the government of India has asked us to do is to bring out, and we are also a company that does one of the early founders of the IoT consortium in the world. So the government of India has specifically asked us to expand our networking NetAcad program, which runs in technology schools, right? Engineering schools,
yes.
to bring these two skills as part of our syllabus and curriculum to colleges. So that's something we're doing. We are part of the Atal Innovation Labs uh, in some chosen engineering colleges where those labs are tinkering labs, right? The tinkering labs focused on IoT, for example, which we have taken, which we are partners and participants in. So there are capabilities available in the country. It's not like you are only dependent on external MOOC classes, right? There are capabilities in the country, so look for them and find a way to upskill yourself. I cannot stress that enough.
Uh, since you've mentioned about the online classes and all, when technology is mentioned, it's always seen that online education or distance education is given more stress on. How can we leverage technology to improve on-campus experience of our students?
So we've done some work in this space, right? So we've done some work in ISBs, some of the IITs, etc. So one of the specific ways is this, right? WebEx, and it doesn't have to be WebEx. It can also be high-end video conferencing, which gives you access to faculty and teachers people to talk to on a regular basis, right? So it doesn't always have to be, many of the professionals who you can call into campus and talk, many of them are constrained by the fact that they cannot physically travel to your college and deliver a lecture. But many of us are very happy to do it if it is only going to take an hour of our time and we can do it over a remote medium. So that is definitely one way of doing. The other thing is uh, STEM research and research in general can benefit. The best form of learning is community learning, right? Community learning means a group of people are learning a skill together, helping each other learn a skill together. So that means, let's say if you are a student of cybersecurity or Internet of Things, you may benefit from talking to a similar group which is in another college or a number of other colleges. So you come together uh, without the boundaries of your learning institution to upskill each other, right? Somebody's good at something, somebody's good at something else. So community learning is the way in which many Western countries have actually created the amount of IP that they're sitting on. And it's definitely a path for us to learn and create better intellectual property and research conversation. So that is definitely another way in which in-campus can. Some of the Western universities where we work, they also do other things, right? Because they have a problem that India doesn't have, because education in India, public education in India is still relatively cheaper than in many countries. But in many countries, what happens is there is a high drop-off rate of college students because they don't see value in college education. So there's a great drop-off rate that happens. And colleges do everything in their power to keep a student engaged when they are on campus. So basically making sure that the learning map is tailored to the student rather than the student having to be tailored to a standard syllabus and a standard class profile and so on and so forth. Still early days in India, I would say. I mean, I can see some universities start to adapt that language, but yeah, that's another way. Customized learning maps is another place where technology, both on campus, is being used. So basically, students are told that if this is available at this place. So there's an engagement plan for the student while the student is on campus, so they don't feel left out and they don't feel that there is no value in coming to this college and they drop out. Because a student who drops out is loss of revenue to a Western college. To that degree, we have not reached, because as a society, we are very formal education conscious. And our cost of education is still relatively lower than many parts of the world. But yeah, 2-3 places, right? For significant community learning, for creating serious R&D IP content, and for engagement of both faculty and students, but we see it more on the student side. That's where on campus we see it happening. And then blending online and offline, right? Not all classes have to happen in person. I talked about that as well.
And now we have an interesting question. What advice would you give to the future female leaders or the business women? And also, how do you balance work and life responsibilities?
It's a question I get all the time, by the way. And I think most women get, if they ever talk anywhere, they get this question. I wish there was a step-by-step process to this, right? Which is why I said a lot of how you become a leader is in part towards skill and your constant learning throughout life. So let me say the 4 things that are important, which I think have worked for me, right? So be curious, and be curious means learning. I use the word learning in this conversation a lot, but being curious is about learning, right? Constantly being a lifelong learner is always a good thing to have. And it can be a blend of formal learning, informal learning, learning from your peers. In my case, I learn a lot from people who are many, many years younger to me, like Sanya and Rasik, who were on this call from Cisco. Sanya is at least 20 years younger than me. But I learn from her and Rasik all the time, right? So learn from wherever you get an opportunity. Be curious about things, even if they don't really, what's in it for me is not always clear. So curiosity is a very, very important life skill to have. The second conversation is around communicate. You have to be a strong communicator. And by strong communicator, I'm not saying that so it's not like we have to use big words like Shashi Tharoor. That's not the point I'm making. But if you have an idea, you have to be able to communicate an idea. And you have to be able to sell people on that, get people to. So the biggest hallmark of a leader is that leader's followership, right? How many people trust that leader, look to that leader for advice, and are willing to follow that leader's vision. And communication is a big part of creating followership. So that, I think, is perhaps a skill to have in your repertoire. Clarity of thought is the third one. So that's where this pragmatic bubble stands, right? You may have a great idea, but you have to quickly figure out how to make it work in the real world, whatever that definition of the world is for you, right? So clarity of thought, clarity of what you want to do. So don't you don't have to do too many things, but you have to be very clear about, you have to have a purpose. Simon Sinek calls it purpose. I call it clarity of thought, but Simon Sinek calls it purpose, right? What motivates you to do what you do? If you can answer that, if your purpose is clear, then you will find a way to make it happen, right? So clarity of thought or purpose, having a purpose in everything you do is something to have. And the last one, because in my 25-year career, I've been faced with this kind of ambiguity many times. The ability to handle change, or change agility, as I call it, change agility, right? To always look for opportunity in disruption, to be comfortable with change, to put yourself, when you learn something, when you get comfortable at something, to go and put yourselves into a place of discomfort. Because unless you can force yourself to face discomfort again and again, you don't learn, you don't grow, you don't adapt. So I would say four things, right? Curiosity, communication, clarity, and change. Acceptance and ability to deal with change. Those are four core skills, I think. The other skills, what you learn through training, learning, etc., they are baseline skills, right? And that also has to be worked at. So you can't, if I'm doing my role today, 2 years later, I cannot be doing the role with the same set of skills, right? I have to either do the role at a much higher degree of perfection, or I have to be doing another role which takes more out of me, puts me into a zone of discomfort, and so on. Yeah, that I think, and work-life balance is an interesting one, right? There are times when work takes a hit. There are times when life takes a hit, and priority changes, right? For not just for women, I think it's true for men as well. Your priority at any given stage in your life may be different. Sometimes you prioritize more on your life. Sometimes you decide to prioritize more on your work. And this is, again, no hard and fast rule, right? The only thing I will say is aiming for perfection in all facets of your life is probably a recipe for disaster, right? So some things will slip. My personal my personal learning is, some days my home will look clean, some days my home will look a little bit like a pigsty, and that's okay, right? So learning to live with what is your priority and being comfortable with the fact that you're not perfect in all the other places of your life is part of it. And each person arrives at their own balance based on what their priority is. It's not something you can take someone's formula and apply it to your life and it will not work for you. But for women, I would say one thing. Um, Please have an identity. Women in particular, perhaps the most important thing, and I should have said that first. Please have an identity uh, beyond being a sister, mother, wife, right? I think it's very, yeah, please have an identity beyond. I'm saying those identities are important. Okay, I don't mean to pay, and I am also, but I'm saying please have an identity besides that. Besides that, if that is your purpose, you'll go a long way. But in your career, but if that is not your purpose, it's fine too. But I think it's very unfair that if you are as educated as you are, you don't contribute to society. Is probably not the right thing to to do, right? You have to pay. There are many things which have gotten, many people have conspired to get you to this stage of your life, and you must pay it forward.
Indeed, to conclude that, we can say that the success mantra of Daisy, right?
Yeah, that, I don't know if it is a success mantra, but it is what has worked for me. I'm quite happy where I am. So I guess ultimately, if you feel happy and you're fulfilled, then the things you've done have worked for you, right? So I will only say it's worked for me. But yeah, it's not necessary that it works for everybody. It is work for me, put me where I am, and I'm very happy to be where I am. So yeah, it's work for me. More than success and mantra, etc. I'm happy and fulfilled. So that's that. I think that's a good place to be.
And ma'am, we have a few similar questions. I'm combining it all. You went from being a techie to a business manager. What advice would you have for us engineers to make it in business world? And also, what are the basic qualities which the first job role has helped in inculcating in you?
Okay. So, you know, I would say more than techie to business, it is about whether you decide to be a specialist or a general manager, right? It's really, you're thinking in these two ways. So if you're a specialist, then it's also about how your primary functioning style is, how you're wired as a human being, right? So if you are a specialist, then your interest, you're more analytical, you're more interested in technology, uh, you like to work on problems by yourself. You're a great peer and mentor, but you don't want to manage people formally. So this is one type of wiring, right? The way that one people are built. The other way people are built is you like, in my case, there are many tests you can take to do this. We do this at Cisco also. So I'm a teacher stimulator. What that means is I love to teach other people the things I know, right? So my biggest skill is finding out who is right for what part of the job, and finding out, giving, just stimulating that person or motivating that person to be the best they can be and teaching them everything I know, right? So if this is how your orientation is, then you are cut to be a people person, right? You can go into general management and uh, formally manage teams of people and so on and so forth. But you also need hard skills. For example, when you're a technologist, you probably, even, on both sides, you will need hard skills. And you will need hard skills which are not about your core competence. For example, a technologist who grows up at Cisco to become a business unit leader also needs to understand finance as much as I, on the sales side of Cisco, need to understand finance. The metrics you might be measuring may be different, but finance as a core skill is something that you definitely need, right? So I would say that to become a professional, the way you learn is you start with one bouquet of skills, right? You start with your engineering degree or a graduation degree or your MBA degree or your polytechnic degree. That is where you start, and that's why I said learning is a lifelong experience. Then you go into a workforce and you look to the left and the right. Some people are generous to teach you what they know. Sometimes you take job rotations, which are materially different exposures. So you pick one more skill up. Then from there, you again move, you get another set of skill sets. You might augment these on the work experience skill sets through learning, formal learning, right? Financial skills, um, project management skills. What else could you be doing? Quality, right? Supply chain, data sciences, analytics, AI, ML. You'll have a formal set of skills. You'll have a learning map on the formal skill set. You will have a more informal learning map on the soft skills skill set. But you keep this game up, right? That is the way you build that is the way you grow. I'm not talking about growth only in terms of grade change and hierarchy, right? I'm also talking about growth between your years. Growth between your years is the first step before you get a formal title. Mostly how you get a formal title, especially in the private sector side of the world in India, how you get a title is you are already exhibiting that skill before you are given that role or given that job. So without knowing a person's particular skills and particular aspirations, you can't give you cannot give advice. But I would say if you have an aspiration, then you have to build a learning plan which is across both hard skills and soft skills to get you to that aspiration.
Ma'am, before wrapping it up, can we have one more question?
Sure, I know I took more than 15 minutes closing, so yeah, sure. I'm happy to.
Okay. Can you please detail the smart farming techniques put forward by Cisco? Is the same applicable in lockdown time? And also, we have learned about an association of Cisco with Government of Kerala in the field of agriculture. Could you please
Yes.
enlighten us about the project?
Yeah. So um, the Kerala project is actually a a pilot project that we are doing in digital agriculture, which is by basically using technology in agri, which is not something that India has perhaps ever done before, right? So the Kerala pilot is uh, truly a path-breaking pilot in that way. In other parts of the world, we do it, but there is a reason. So here are the few. I did say that technology used to solve problems at scale is digital, right? That is what digital transformation is about. So if you look at Kerala, the problem, uh, in agriculture in India, the broader problem is 50% of our people are in agriculture, but only 17% of our GDP is contributed by agriculture. So that's the first issue, right? Too many people, the productivity is very poor, and even smaller countries like Vietnam and Israel and Netherlands and all of that are doing a much better job than us. So, and of course, you are all familiar with the farmer situation in the country, right? Because poorer productivity, lower income, and therefore those types of issues. Kerala's, and because it is a very disaggregated form of farming, which means the average farmer land parcel in India is not like in Australia, right? In Australia, there are 4 farmers whose land worth is more than the Queen of England, but we are not in that situation. So we are like half a hectare and upwards kind of farmhold. So this is the nature of agriculture in India overall. But in Kerala, I think the problem is twofold, particularly because of the floods that have happened and which are anticipated to happen, because I read an article, and I'm not sure whether that is the only truth behind it, but apparently, if the Pacific Ocean temperature goes up by half a degree, Kerala will expect floods every year at about the same time. So it will become much like this COVID problem, an annual sort of a phenomenon, right? And so the typical farmer in India is actually got a book of wisdom from his father or his grandfather. He plants at the same time. So the weather is predictable, right? The weather is predictable, and therefore all farming, most parts of the world, especially in agrarian countries with lesser technology like ours, are dependent on traditional wisdom. But weather is changing all over the world, global warming on one side, flooding on another side, etc. So there needs to be a way for the farmer to understand and change their routine in line with what weather is. So that's one concern in Kerala also, right? So there's a lot of weather information that the weather department has, etc. But this is not translating into how the farmers are executing in their farms, right? This information doesn't reach them in real time, and therefore they continue to plant when they will sow when the rain is expected to come in 2 days and wash away everything, etc. So paddy farming is hit by this issue. And then we're doing an experiment. The other crop, I think, because Kerala is a big seafood exporter, is in prawn, where the problem is that the pH level, right? If you don't constantly monitor the pH level in the ponds, entire crop gets wiped out in a matter of hours. If the pH level in the water changes, then that entire pond is gone, right? So it's a huge loss to the prawn cultivators in the state as well. So we've done a very simple thing. It's not very, from a technology point of view, it's not very, it's not rocket science. We've put sensors. So we've taken a district in Kannur, because Kannur Engineering College was a knowledge partner to the government. So therefore they gave us a few panchayats in Kannur. In Kannur, in the rice farms, we have put some sensors. We've put some sensors in the prawn ponds. And obviously they are different. They're measuring different things, right? Based on, and that information is flowing through a series of people who need to have access to that information, both on the agriculture department side as well. So mainly the agriculture department side. So that information is moving to people who can coordinate and give advice to the end farmer. And on the other side, we have aggregated all the weather reporting people, whether it is people who are giving satellite-based feed, etc., etc. So there's the weather information on one end, the farmers' inputs on the other end. We are only enabling this exchange of information. Simplistically put, obviously at the central level, there is a dashboard where things can be continuously monitored. Pretty much like I'm sure all of you have seen police control room kinds of situation, right? So this is like a control room. So any change in pH level in some farm can be centrally monitored. Any change in weather can be quickly conveyed. So making sure that this information transaction is happening in real time as well. Because by the time someone calls up somebody, the rain's come and gone, or the pond is flushed out already, right? So it doesn't help. So it's a very simplistic intervention. We've finished the implementation side. We are starting to do the data collection. We've done a great degree of enablement because the stakeholders are across so many places, right? It's across the farming community, the agriculture department, the weather department, the IT department of Kerala, the knowledge partner, that's Kannur Engineering College. So the stakeholder enablement conversations, all of that are done, so people know how the process is going to work. And I'm hoping that we'll now start to see data and make significant interventions, which will ultimately help the farming community. That's the hope. It's something we already do in other countries. It's just that we haven't done this in India.
Okay, ma'am.
And there's great excitement in this pilot because I think Mr. Amitabh Kant, who is heading NITI, is an ex Kerala cadre officer, right? So he's also looking very anxiously for the result of this POC, or this pilot, because it will give us perhaps one of the ways to intervene in agriculture in the country. It won't be the only thing, but one of the ways in which we intervene. But it can be extended to monitor animals also, right? Cows, for example, we are a large milk producing nation, surplus milk producing nation. So in another state, we are talking animal husbandry use cases and paddy, right? Not prawn. So.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'll be happy for you guys to go take a look if you want. Once it's up and ready and it's ready to be previewed, we invite folks to come look at it, give us ideas, because we're doing it in that fashion, right? As a on the ground learning pilot.
Sure, ma'am. We'll love to do that. Okay, ma'am, looks like we have covered almost all our questions. So, ma'am, is there anything else you want to cover before a wrap up?
No, I only hope it has been a good use of all your time. Because I'm conscious that, you all have enough things that you'd like to do. So I just hope it's been useful in some way.
Okay. I thank all the attendees for being patient listeners. And thank you, ma'am, for accepting our invitation and sharing your insights on how to turn every crisis into an opportunity, and also motivating us by saying the future is all about action, but not position. Thoughts on the new normal, and it was indeed a great session. On behalf of ASAP family and Government of Kerala, I extend my gratitude to you and thank you so much. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you for the opportunity again, Deepti, to you and to ASAP. And please do let me know if there's any feedback about the session. Like I said, I'm constantly learning, and we are also constantly developing this point of view, right, around COVID responses. So I think there's a question. I see a chat window. Oh no, it's a comment. Okay.
Okay.
In fact, I see a few questions on the chat window. Employability, multilingualist with excellent communication skills in the IT sector.
Would you like to answer to those questions?
Yeah, I think, like I said, one of the,
Sure.
if you are a multilingualist, then your job market is really not India, right? It is the world, and there aren't many people who can speak French or Spanish, or Chinese or English, right? A combination of those language, any one of those. English, of course, I'm assuming that everybody is across it. But I'm saying any of the other languages are definitely opens up a completely new market to you, right? especially in the customer, every industry, I would say. If you're a native speaker, your chances of getting a role in another country, serving another market is very, very high. Japanese also. The IT industry in India does have people skilled in that language. I know when I was at Wipro in the mid 90s to the early 2000s, many of our people who faced the Japanese business actually spoke Japanese as well. So that's a rare skill. So if you have it, definitely your employability chance does go up. What is the effect of internships and industrial trainings for professional students? High, because it is very simply this, right? Uh, if you know somebody, internships give us a chance to bring somebody into our environment and test them out. So, and if we like what we see, and also there's a relationship that develops, right? There's a bond that develops, etc. So if somebody is really good and they come in and they fit into our culture, and I'm speaking broadly for all companies, right? If they come in during an internship, they fit into our culture, they display their employability, the chances of hiring them versus hiring from a broad pool of candidates who we don't know is much higher. And like I said, there's a relationship that develops, etc. So it's not just about having an internship, it's also how you show up during that internship, right? That kind of matters. What else? Are there any other questions I didn't answer? Then please.
Sure, ma'am. We'll mail it to you so that you can
Yeah,
answer
I
it.
can
And
only
along,
see. I can only see these two questions from. I think one was from Ajo Benny and the other was from Adarsh, right? So these are the no, not yeah, from Ajo actually. Yeah. So it's like I said, internship is very, very good. They allow you to learn. They expose you to opportunities inside companies. But internships will only get you a role depending on how you come across in that internship.
we have few more questions too, but then I guess we'll mail all the questions to you so that you can answer it.
Yeah,
And
I'm
also
sorry.
we'll be
I
sharing the.
do have another meeting at 12:30, so I can't stay
Okay.
on more than another 5 minutes at most.
Okay. So would
Any
you
big
like?
any big questions that I can take in the next 5 minutes?
Yes, there are. Uh,
Go
you've
ahead.
talked ab- you've talked about people are becoming more distributed and dispersed. Do you think there will be more option to work from our hometowns instead of
Yes,
moving to Bangalore or Chennai, etc.?
yes.
Will companies start to see potential in hiring remotely?
Yeah, TCS has already put it out, right? TCS has already made a formal declaration, and TCS is not a small employer. 4 lakh plus is the current TCS employee base, right? Concentrated mostly between 5 or 6 cities. And despite TCS having a small setup in Trivandrum, a lot of people still move out of Kerala to work in TCS. TCS has made a statement that they will, in the next 5 years, be a 75%. They put out a formal goal to be a 75% work from home company in the next 5 years. I suspect more companies will follow suit. It may not be as ambitious as 75%, but certainly, uh, it will not be, I don't think it will be that everybody come to work inside an office. That is going to change. So yes, the opportunity to work even for a known brand from your hometown is going to increase, is our assessment at this point.
We have one more question. What are the futuristic courses that humanities students can choose after their 12th? And also a question related to that. Since the world is going digital to a large extent, how non-technical students can benefit from this? Non-technical
So
students like commerce students and arts students.
yeah, so the people. I want to point you to Jack Ma, who built Alibaba, right? Jack Ma was asked a question, I think, at the World Economic Forum this year or last year about whether, because Asian countries in general value math and science over everything else. And so he was asked a question, what's going to happen to our kids, because computers will always beat children, even the brightest, in terms of computation and so on and so forth. He said, you take my advice, leave the computing to the computers, um, and move towards teach your children how to connect the dots, more lateral thinking, more right brain thinking, etc., which is focus on arts, humanities, etc. Let me give you a few live examples of how this plays out. Um, let's take marketing, humanities and arts, right? And broadly, let's take marketing as a function. In the past, the people who were very good at math and science would go become engineers. The people who are really good at writing English would go off to become content copy editors and go off to become marketing folks and so on and so forth. But you look at how marketing is changing, right? There's this term called digital marketing. So digital marketing is basically encompasses this point about how to sell to an increasingly invisible consumer. So they can't look at you and say that, like me, you are 47 years old, so you're likely, and you are, you kind of, you're wearing this at this point, so you're likely to like this kind of clothes. They can't make that assessment anymore, right? But they can make an assessment by look, because I'm buying online, but they can see that I like to buy natural fibers. They see that I like sustainability. They know my age group. They probably know what my income bracket is. So they can start tailoring a persona and start selling to me. Now, is this, but they still have to capture me with their language, with their advertisement, they still have to do the traditional parts of marketing. So it's a combination skill, right? On one side, you still have to keep all your marketing skills alive and well. But on the other side, you probably also have to start looking at your analytics skills, persona building skills, etc., for which AI engines are the ones. You cannot look at the 1.3 billion consumers in India and make a person by person profile on an individual effort basis. So you will be the person that curates some of the rules of how you want to see personas emerge, and you will tell an AI system to start aggregating people into personas. So yes, you are a content person, and you are a marketing person, and you may have been an art student or an English journalism student, but here you are suddenly having to deal with an artificial intelligence engine which is creating the customer personas that you previously would have found out with some person to person market survey or something like that. I have friends at Cisco whose children uh, have studied psychology and public policy, but are now working in financial advice firms. There are children who are doing arts courses for their primary as their major, but they are doing data analytics courses and digital marketing courses as their secondary. So that's why I said the skills that you need may be adjacent to what you already know, but also maybe very left field skills, right? So do not think that because you are a humanities student or an arts student, communication, right, which is one of the big success pillars for anybody in today's world, generally tends to be a strength of the arts and humanities crowd than the engineering and technology crowd. Communication, both written, as well as verbal, right? So don't bucket yourself into, because I'm a humanities student or an arts student, this is what I can do. This is the limit of what. Think in a boundaryless and limitless fashion. Yeah? Broaden your mind. All your limitations. One of my ex-managers told me, and I think it was a gift he gave me. He said, Daisy, your only limitation is between your ears. Means what you believe you can be is what you can be. Right? So there is no superior quality to an engineering student or a medical student, right? If you are really good at writing, if you're really good at drawing, I'll give you an example which goes far back to my days when I was in engineering college. And I had at that time a friend who was good at sketching, and he had a friend who was really good at sketching, who was an engineer. And when everybody was going off to the US to do their masters, he went off to do a course in animation. But only 2-3 years from then, his name appeared on the credit titles for one of the Toy Story movies because he got a job at Pixar. So, be bold to take and make choices which your parents may not have made, which your friends may not be making. But if that is a interest and a passion for you and you see a possibility to build a career and a life there, go for it. These examples are around you already, by the way. All the examples I gave you are of people who are as old as you.
That's indeed great, ma'am.
I would recommend there is a TED talk on why the humanities is good for is equal, why the world needs the humanities. I think it's a 25-minute TED talk by this British gentleman. I think his name is Ted Richardson. He's an educationist in the UK. Please look it up for anybody who has concerns about, and like I said, Jack Ma is only a single quote. I would much recommend you watch I think his name is Ted Richardson, if I'm not mistaken. Why the World Needs Humanities is a TED talk, 25-minute, very funny TED talk, which will clarify some of what this will say it much better than what I'm saying. There's a question on what is better. Is it MS or MTech? Mechanical engineering student, which is better, MS or MTech? Are you talking about, Ajo, whether you are going abroad or staying here? Because in MS it's typically a Western university's designation for a master's degree, and yeah, MTech is typically an Indian conversation. See, there is no secret here, right? Some facts are facts. I'm Indian, very proud to be Indian, but I can't bend the rules. Many universities abroad, right, rate higher than Indian universities. It's a fact. Right? So, quality of education, if you really get a seat at if the question is, should you go to IIT Mumbai versus IIT, I don't know, one of the newer IITs, the answer is very obvious, even in an Indian context, right? Go to IIT Mumbai because the quality of education is better there. If the question is, should I go to IIT Mumbai or should I go to Yale or, to Columbia? Again, it's a pretty factual question to answer, right? Because the truth is that those institutes are rated in that fashion because of a certain skill and quality. It's a hard thing to swallow. It's a hard pill to swallow, but it is. So it really depends not on whether it's abroad or whether it is India. Rather than go to a tier 3 MS in the US, you're better off going to an IIT Delhi or a IIT Kharagpur or IIT Mumbai. Right? So it really depends on what is the opportunity you're getting from where. It is not about MS or MTech. It really is on the institute where you get to study. And even that cannot fully guarantee success in life, like I said. That it can set you up. It can set you up on the initial. It will get you a great opening. So a great institute definitely will get you the first stepping stone in your career. But then the rest is sort of up to you. How you build it from there. Sorry, Ajo, I couldn't sort of give you a definitive answer, right? It really depends on where your MS is and where your MTech is going to be. And like I said, even then, it will give you the first step. It will give you access to your first career opportunity. It will not take you along all the way.
Ajay is actually muted, I guess, ma'am, so he might be replying back to the chat.
Now he's very courteous in his reply. He only says, "Okay, ma'am."
Okay. So, ma'am, thank you for motivating us to chase our dreams and addressing on the internship and the importance of upskilling and all. And once again, I thank you so much.
And I wish you guys
on the
all
behalf of Sure, ma'am. On behalf of SF and also Government of Kerala, I extend my gratitude to you. Thank you so much for having us. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much again for the opportunity. I wish you all the best. And please remember, this too shall pass. We are a very resilient race, and economic downturns are only 3 to 6 months. It's nothing in a career of 30 to 40 years.
Sure, ma'am. We'll keep that in mind. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, ma'am.